So, today's area of discussion is going to be about guilt. And guilt, believe it or not, could be either a healthy type of guilt or an unhealthy type of guilt. Guilt is an emotion that has a lot of power and it affects us as people. So, you might feel guilt sometimes. Maybe the reason why you can be feeling guilty is because you might have taken an action or have done something and you might not be feeling good about it. And that is actually a healthy guilt because it's something that you can bring inside your awareness to understand an action that you took was not a good one. And due to the fact that it's an emotion that doesn't make you feel good within your body, it comes out as guilt. So, take for example, you might have exploded at your partner and you know that the person actually didn't do anything about that. So, that might make you feel guilty, right? So, that's a beautiful emotion that comes up, even though it's portrayed not to be quite a pleasant one. And there are ways that you can rectify guilt because you need to understand that holding on to it is not going to really serve you. You need to know how to address guilt. So always remember when you do something that you feel guilty about, right? It's very important to be able to address that guilt. So if you did something, you have to take action and rectify that. Now, on the contrary, when we're dealing with unhealthy guilt, that's something that might not come from you. So perhaps it's a situation outside of yourself that you're just automatically feeling guilty about. And that type of guilt is important to understand that it might not even be arising from you, and you have to inquire about it, why you're feeling guilty in some situations. So, for example, say you have a person that doesn't treat you very well and they tell you things about yourself which are not true, and without even being that person of what they say to you, you can feel guilty, right? And maybe questioning yourself whether what they're saying is real. So what you need to understand there is that that type of guilt is an unhealthy one. So it's important to be able to name your guilt and see what type of a guilt is it, because if you do not address the guilt, what happens is it can easily lead up to a lot of tension and a lot of build-up. So guilt, for me, what I have about guilt is that you need to understand that it's an emotion, right, that is quite negative. It's an intense emotion. So if you really get to think about it, guilt doesn't really help by helping you move forward in life, and it's not a motivator of life. So by feeling guilty, it doesn't really serve a great purpose, right? When it's dealt with unhealthily, of course, I'm talking to now. There are uses of guilt, as I said before, but let's keep that to healthy guilt. I had a conversation with another lady the other day, and she actually she was feeling quite guilty, and we discussed the matter. It was an intimate issue. So I'll tell you what happened with that lady. So she was dating a guy back in the days, and she was going out with him for quite a lot of years, and they broke up, and she went through something like a middle-age crisis that we say, and a lot of people can go through that. And it was a stage where her hormonal levels were quite high, and what she did is during that time she wanted to enjoy her single life. So during that single life, she met a guy, not quite a serious guy. I will name him the player guy. So she ended up flirting with that guy, and they ended up in bed together, right? And that girl, keep it in mind, was not that type of character. And it was an emotion that she never experienced in her life. She never slept with another guy ever in her life. So it was a very new experience for her. And she actually got outside of her comfort zone, right? And she did what she did. And after a year, it's something that is still bothering her. She's still feeling about that, and she's feeling guilty. Because what happens with that guy is that she slept with that guy, and then the guy ghosted her. And what I mean by ghosting is a person that can automatically, out of the blue, make a disappear in your life. So the guy ghosted her, and he disappeared for about 2 weeks, right? So during those 2 weeks, you can imagine that that girl wasn't feeling very alright, because she is a nice girl, right? She's not the type that sleeps around, always a girl that had long-term relationships, always a serious type of girl. And she just went in the moment and did something that she felt like doing. And the action of that other person, which he just suddenly disappeared, did not have a good effect on her. So she was built up with a lot of guilt, right? And the disappearance of that guy also amplified the guilt that she's been feeling. And what happens is, while she was going through all of that guilt, more things started to happen inside the brain. So she started to think, oh my God, what happened? I went to that guy's house, we slept together, and what happens if that guy recorded us while we were lovemaking? Like, oh my God, I couldn't bear that, So things like that. So the moral of the story is that guilt in that situation is not a great emotion, right? Because at that certain point in time, that girl was ready to get out of her comfort zone. So she was with a guy for a lot of years, and she wasn't very sexual as a person, let's say. She didn't have it good with her own sexuality, right? So she was seeing other people around her doing things, and she thought, why aren't I able to do those things? Why am I so rigid in things like that? Right? And it just happened. And quite frankly, there's nothing wrong with that. And this is something natural that a lot of people go through, right? And there's a lot of judgment when it comes to sex and all of these things. But you need to understand that everybody's entitled to do how they feel, as long as it doesn't hurt somebody. And the guilt that is associated with that, when we dig deeper to that, was the fact that she had some sort of trauma about that. And I'll explain to you what. Many years ago, she used to date a guy, right, which was quite rigid and quite religious, and he had very different ways of views about sex. So what happens is, with that guy, he always used to guilt trip her and tell her that even by them performing in bed, it was kind of like a sin, right? So it wasn't good for them to be engaging anything else in the bedroom apart from just having sex. So anything else, he would find it as a very disgraceful act. So what he would tell her is that he used to look at other women who might have been dressed quite beautifully, and they were quite sexy as women. So when that guy used to see that woman, he used to say, oh, look at her, she's such a whore, right? And what happens with that girl in the past, because she was dating him for a lot of years. See, when you date with people for a lot of years, they start becoming like you, and you start becoming like them. You get a lot of traits for them. And unconsciously, she put in her subconscious that perhaps some things of lovemaking can be quite, how do you say, some things of lovemaking make her feel guilty because she feels that it's kind of sinful for a woman to sleep with somebody else, right? So the guy was like the type of guy that was believing that you only sleep with people that you're only gonna end up marrying with, which of course is a great thing, don't get me wrong, right? But it is a rarity these days because people are in fact sexually engaging with one another, right? And the point I want to say here is that guilt, there's a reason why that guilt came up and why she felt what she felt. Now, does that mean we should label it as a good or a bad? No, there's no good and bad. There are people out there that prefer not to be sexual with a partner and just proceed to go and commit to that person. And there are people out there that feel like exploring, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? The only thing that can get affected that you need to know is by when you're sleeping with a person, you need to understand that you infuse yourself with the energy of the other person. So things start to get more intense when you get engaged in sexual activity with the other person. So that's something that you need to be aware of. So for example, if you are sleeping with a person who's quite toxic as a person, you need to understand that his negativity and his toxicity is going to be infused within your body. And it's quite difficult to be able to disengage with that. And that's why we have a lot of weird and strange and toxic relationships going on, because a lot of people are sleeping with the wrong people. And it's not quite healthy to be sleeping around. So you need to be careful who you choose to sleep with. But a lot of people in their lifetimes have slept with the wrong people, and there's nothing wrong with that. Why? Because you learn not to do things like that anymore. If you learn, that is. But be very wary who you sleep with. Anyway, the point of the discussion here was about guilt. And you need to understand that guilt is an emotion that is not going to serve you. And you need to, if it's a guilt that is something that is beyond your control, you need to understand that it's not going to be able to serve you for nothing. And guilt is something that you learn from life. So if you were raised in an environment, for example, that your family might have been quite rigid or religious or different types of things that always, you might have been scared of them, or maybe you had some friends in the past that were quite close-minded and they had different ways of seeing things, the way they were conditioned. And if you hanged around with them, you need to understand that you were infused also with those traits, and it's in your subconscious. So usually guilt is something that we learn from. We learn from guilt. So it can serve when you're doing something that you know is not good. It can serve a good thing. But on the contrary, if it's unhealthy, it doesn't really serve you. It doesn't really serve you. So in order to make you understand, imagine, right? Take, for example, when you're feeling happy. So what does that emotion make you feel? It makes you feel joyous, right? It makes you feel good. It makes you feel positive. So obviously that is a great emotion, right? All people want to feel great, right? They don't want to feel sad. So take guilt, for example. What type of an emotion is that? It's quite a sad feeling. It's quite a stressful feeling. It's quite an anxiety type of feeling, right? So obviously that's a negative emotion. So which one would you rather be, the positive one or the negative one? Do you see where I'm coming from? So we need to understand that anything that brings us into a state of imbalance, it's something that we need to learn to let go of. So guilt is not a balanced emotion. So we need to balance the guilt. So we need to understand where the guilt comes from, where we picked it up from, and try to find ways to let go of that guilt. It's very, very important. So you can sit aside and ask yourself, why am I feeling guilty? Is it actually coming from me? Do I perhaps have some association to that guilt that perhaps is not healthy? So if you're thinking about the guilt and you might be thinking, "Oh, what are people gonna think about me?" Right? You need to understand that you're putting yourself in a position where you are taking an external condition. So you are waiting for approval of other people because you're thinking that they're gonna judge you. But you need to understand that you need to accept yourself for who you are with all your authenticity. And it has nothing to do with other people. And other people should not be making you feel guilty. And even if they do make you feel guilty, you need to understand that there is a line that perhaps that people may have crossed, and you might perhaps need to put a boundary and not accept that type of behavior. Because as a person, you need to understand that your feelings are very valid. What we do and the way we act out there, right? There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people are undercover and they're quite secretive, and they feel quite ashamed to admit about stuff that they have done in their lives, right? And that, as I said before, comes from the way that we were conditioned, right? So you need to understand that half of the people out there, you'd be shocked to see the stuff that they're doing. And let's take, for example, sex. There's a lot of people out there that are having sex and they have different sexual fetishes that people don't speak about. And it is perfectly natural. Every person out there has their own set of ways of performing in sexual activities. And a lot of people feel guilty. A lot of people feel guilty about their sexual orientation, right? And it was placed upon people because a lot of people have taboos when it comes to sex, right? They feel a lot of guilt. They don't want to express their real nature. They don't. And they hide that. They hide that. And that's another reason why a lot of relationships have problems, because there's many people out there that feel like doing certain things and they're always thinking what the others are gonna say. They haven't approved themselves of who they are. And you need to understand that every person out there has their own set of thinking about sexual activities. And there's nothing deformed about anything. Nothing, absolutely nothing. See, there are many reasons, depending on what the person likes to behave in their bed, that's associated with part of their past. And a lot of people don't know that. So we have a lot of young men, for example, that perhaps were gay, right? And usually most of the cases of people that end up being gay are usually people that had a person in their family which was quite authoritative, quite strict, and quite demanding, right? And it's usually a masculine figure that shapes the person that can end up being gay. And there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Right? At the same time, it can also a strict person, a parental figure that has been in somebody's life can make a person be kind of masochistic in nature. So they can enjoy intense pleasure of pain. So if they were raised in an environment that was in extreme pain, usually the sexual experience would be enjoyable if it creates some sort of pain. And lots of different things out there. There's people that enjoy role playing. They have all sorts of fetishes. There's people out there that have been through a lot with their lives, and you need to understand that everybody's fantasies are valid and in existence. And we need to stop placing judgments on people and thinking that we know everything. Because each one of us is unique in their nature, and we need to stop all that. We need to stop all that. We need to get to understand people on a deeper level, why people behave the way they behave. And again, there is nothing wrong with anything that has to do like with the sexual activity, right? Just try to address where all that guilt comes from and try to deassociate the belief that you have that has to do with guilt. And learn to differentiate what is healthy and what is unhealthy guilt. And health and guilt doesn't actually serve you a lot. The unhealthy guilt, yeah? And learn to disengage with that because it doesn't help you move forward and it doesn't motivate you in life to take action. But actually, guilt can actually help you take action. Because if you're feeling guilty about something, it can make you want to be able to go forward and address the matter. So, for example, if you did something to somebody, you can go there and apologize to that person, right? If you did something that makes you feel guilty. Learn from your guilt. Really, really learn from it. And understand that the emotions that come up for you, any type of emotion, they're valid emotions. You need to go through them. And you're not the only person that is going through their emotions. You see, all of us have very similar things between one another. But what happens is that a lot of people conceal those things and they're not acknowledging them. There are people that are much extroverted to discuss those things, and there's lots of people that are quite introverted that like to keep the things to themselves. But it's great to understand that there's nothing wrong with a lot of things that people do. Have a beautiful day. Bye.